I stood perfectly still as the sting of my father's heavy hand burned across my cheek. My sister was screaming at me to get out of her extravagant birthday party. My mother just turned her back and adjusted her designer pearls, acting like I did not exist. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for forgiveness for a crime I did not commit. Instead, I walked out of that country club with my head held high. The very next morning, I signed a wire transfer for $150 million to buy 3 private island mansions in the Red Sea. Paid in full. They thought they were discarding the family failure, but they had no idea they had just declared war on a billionaire. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members who never saw your true worth. My name is Maya. I am 29 years old, and my family has always cared more about their high society image than they ever cared about me. The tension had been brewing long before the cake was even cut at Naomi's 35th birthday party. The setting was the Magnolia Country Club, the most exclusive gathering place for Atlanta's Black elite. These were the circles where generations of wealth country club memberships and pristine public images dictated your worth as a human being. Women in trailing designer gowns and men in custom-tailored tuxedos milled around the grand ballroom, sipping imported champagne and comparing their latest luxury purchases. I was standing near the edge of the room, minding my own business in a simple but elegant emerald green dress I had bought for myself. I had only come because my mother Vivian had guilt-tripped me for 3 weeks straight, insisting that family appearances were absolutely everything. She needed all her children present to maintain the illusion of the perfect, flawless family she projected to her socialite friends. That is when Connor approached. Connor is my sister, Naomi's white husband. He is a venture capitalist who comes from old money, and he never misses an opportunity to remind everyone in our family of that fact. He carried himself with an arrogant swagger, a crystal wine glass held loosely in his hand. He deliberately swayed as he walked past me, bumping his shoulder hard into mine. A massive splash of deep red wine sloshed directly down the front of my green dress, soaking through the fabric instantly. "Oh, my bad, Maya," he said. His voice was dripping with loud fake sympathy, designed specifically to draw the attention of the wealthy guests standing nearby. "I really hope you did not have to rent that dress. How is the freelance computer gig going anyway? Are you making enough mixing up little codes to keep the lights on in that tiny apartment of yours? You know, if you ever want a real job, my receptionist is going on maternity leave." I did not scramble for a napkin. I did not act embarrassed or shrink away like he expected me to. I simply looked down at the dark stain ruining my dress, took a slow breath, and then looked Connor dead in the eye. "I am doing just fine, Connor," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and remarkably calm. "I am certainly doing better than someone who had to quietly borrow $2 million from his in-laws' retirement fund just to keep his venture capital firm from completely going under." "How are those margin calls treating you this quarter? I heard the banks are getting impatient." The color instantly drained from Connor's face. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. He looked around nervously to see who among the elite crowd had heard my comment, but before he could formulate a defense or a denial, my golden child sister Naomi materialized beside him. Draped in diamonds that I knew for a fact she could not actually afford, she let out a loud theatrical gasp. "How dare you speak to my husband that way?" Naomi shrieked. Her voice echoed off the high vaulted ceilings, cutting through the chatter and silencing the string quartet playing in the corner. Everyone in the ballroom turned to stare at us. "You always do this, Maya. You are so jealous of my success and my beautiful marriage that you have to come here and ruin my special day with your vicious, crazy lies. You are a toxic, pathetic failure, and you are ruining my brand." Before I could calmly explain to the room that it was not a lie, my father Marcus pushed his way through the crowd of onlookers. His face was thunderous dark with a rage I had seen many times before. He cared about his country club reputation and his standing among Atlanta's elite more than he cared about breathing. Without asking a single question, without looking at the dripping wine on my dress, or listening to a word of explanation, he raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sharp crack of his hand hitting my skin echoed through the sudden suffocating silence of the ballroom. My cheek burned, but I kept my posture perfectly straight. "You are a disgrace to this family," my father growled, his voice shaking with absolute fury. "You show up here looking like a beggar, insulting your brother-in-law, trying to drag your own sister down to your miserable level just because you refuse to go to law school. Get out of my sight and do not ever come back." I looked past his angry face to my mother Vivian. I waited for her to step in to say something, anything to defend her youngest daughter. Instead, she did not even meet my eyes. She simply turned her back to me, facing the crowd, and began adjusting her pearl necklace, pretending this ugly scene was not happening to her own flesh and blood. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not plead my case to people committed to misunderstanding me. I simply nodded, turned on my heel, and walked out the grand double doors into the humid Atlanta night. I stepped into my waiting black car and pulled out my phone. I opened a secure encrypted messaging app and typed a quick note to my wealth manager in Geneva. "Wire $150 million immediately. I want the 3 private mansions on Nujuma Island in the Red Sea. Cash transaction. And as the new owner of the private sector, cancel all existing reservations, especially Connor Vance's anniversary booking." I hit send, watching the city lights blur past my window. My family thought they had just banished a struggling, awkward freelancer. They had absolutely no idea they had just slapped the undercover CEO of a multi-billion-dollar real estate technology empire, and their perfectly curated house of cards was about to come crashing down. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Buckhead penthouse, casting a warm glow over the imported Italian marble floors. My family thought I lived in a cramped, dark studio apartment on the wrong side of town. They had absolutely no idea that I owned the entire top floor of one of the most exclusive residential high-rises in Atlanta. I stood at the massive quartz kitchen island, sipping a cup of black coffee and watching my phone vibrate relentlessly across the smooth surface. The screen was lighting up with rapid-fire notifications from the family group chat. My sister Naomi had started the onslaught at exactly 6 in the morning. She sent a picture of a crushed red wine-stained tier of her custom birthday cake. Beneath the photo, she typed a long, dramatic paragraph demanding that I immediately wire her $4,000 to compensate for the emotional distress and the ruined dessert. My father Marcus chimed in, right after her typing in his usual commanding tone. He demanded I write a formal apology letter to the club management and to Connor for my erratic behavior, adding that my presence was a constant liability to his social standing. My mother Vivian sent a single passive-aggressive message about how hard she had worked to secure that country club membership, only for me to treat her reputation like a cheap public park. I read every single message with a detached clinical calmness. For 29 years, those words would have sent me into a spiraling panic. I would have drafted a dozen apologies, drained my meager savings to pay for the cake, and begged for their forgiveness just to keep the peace. But today, I did not type a single letter in response. I was done shrinking myself to fit into their suffocating box. Instead, I swiped away from their toxic group chat and opened my encrypted private banking portal. The digital documents from my wealth manager in Geneva were waiting for my final authorization. The contract was for the outright purchase of the 3 most exclusive private beachfront estates on Nujuma Island, a breathtaking ultra-luxury sanctuary in the Red Sea. The total purchase price was $150 million. I traced my finger over the screen, reviewing the transfer details. The funds were being pulled directly from the holding company I had built, from absolute scratch. The very same artificial intelligence data company my family had constantly mocked as a little freelance computer gig. Without a second thought, I entered my authorization code and hit confirm. The screen flashed a brilliant green. Transfer successful. Paid in cash. Paid in full. Just as I set my coffee mug down, my phone began to ring loudly. The caller identification displayed Connor. I let it ring 3 times before I finally answered, not saying a word. Connor did not wait for a greeting. His voice boomed through the speaker, thick with the unearned arrogance of a man who had coasted on his family name his entire life. I hope you are packing your bags, Maya, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. After the pathetic stunt you pulled last night, your father is ready to completely cut you out of the family trust. You really crossed the line this time. You know you are incredibly lucky I did not have the club security detain you for causing a public disturbance. I leaned against the counter, staring out at the sprawling city skyline. I remained perfectly silent, letting his massive ego fill the empty space. His confidence swelled with my silence. Since you decided to ruin Naomi's birthday, I had to do something spectacular to make it up to her, he boasted. I just got off the phone with my luxury travel concierge. I booked the ultra-exclusive overwater VIP villa at Nujuma Island for our 10-year anniversary next month. It is the most expensive private resort in the world. They only cater to actual elites, Maya. Connor let out a smug, arrogant chuckle, completely unaware that his venture capital firm was secretly bleeding money and that the luxury trip he just booked was nothing more than a desperate illusion of wealth. He dropped his voice, taking on that familiar, patronizing tone he used whenever he wanted to put me in my place. You know, Maya, if you ever want to see a beach that pristine, you really need to drop this fake tech entrepreneur act. With your basic computer skills, the only way you will ever step foot on an island like Nujuma is if you find yourself a wealthy sugar daddy to foot the bill, or maybe if they hire you to clean the villa pools. He laughed loudly at his own cruel joke. It was the exact same mocking laugh he gave 5 years ago when I asked him to review my first business plan. Back then, he had tossed my proposal back across his desk and told me to stick to answering phones because women like me did not understand real venture capital. I had swallowed the intense humiliation then. I was not swallowing anything today. I hope you bought travel insurance, Connor, I said quietly. My voice was completely devoid of emotion, a cold, flat statement of fact that made him pause. What is that supposed to mean? He scoffed, clearly annoyed that I was not breaking down in tears or apologizing. Are you threatening my vacation now? You really are losing your mind. I did not bother explaining myself to a man who was about to lose everything. I simply pressed the red button to end the call, cutting off his entitled rant mid-sentence. I immediately opened my recent contacts and dialed a direct international line. The phone rang only once before it was answered. Good morning, Miss Maya, a polished professional voice greeted me. This is the executive concierge at Nujuma Island. We have just received confirmation of your wire transfer. Welcome and congratulations on your purchase. We are completely at your service. How may we assist you today? I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the tiny cars, navigating the Atlanta traffic far below. Thank you, I replied smoothly. As the new majority owner of the private sector, I have my first executive directive. I need you to immediately cancel all existing public reservations for the upcoming month. I want the entire estate locked down and made strictly private. The concierge did not miss a beat. Of course, Miss Maya. We will begin issuing the cancellations and refunding the deposits right away. Is there anything else? I smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of my lips. Yes, I said, my voice dropping to a cool whisper. Look up a new booking under the name Connor Vance. I want his reservation canceled immediately. And when you notify him, do not offer any alternative accommodations. Just tell him the new owner simply does not want him there. The very next afternoon, the flimsy front door of my decoy apartment swung open without so much as a knock. I was sitting at a cheap laminate dining table nursing a glass of water when my mother Vivienne marched inside. She was wearing a pristine white linen suit and carrying a designer bag that she held tightly against her side, as if the very air in my apartment might contaminate the leather. I maintained this modest two-bedroom apartment in a gentrifying Atlanta neighborhood for one specific reason. It was the perfect visual lie. It kept my family entirely convinced that I was exactly what they thought I was, a struggling freelance data analyst who could barely afford groceries. They had no idea my actual primary residence was a $10 million penthouse overlooking the city. Vivienne did not bother to take off her designer sunglasses. She looked around my staged living room with a deeply practiced expression of utter disgust. Her eyes scanned the thrift store sofa and the bare walls before finally landing on me. She reached into her bag, pulled out a crisp manila folder, and tossed it onto the table right in front of me. The heavy paper slid across the laminate and stopped against my water glass. "Read it and pack your things," she commanded, her voice carrying that familiar country club superiority. "You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." I did not reach for the folder. I just looked up at her, keeping my face completely blank. "What is this, Mom?" "It is a formal eviction notice," she said, crossing her arms. "Naomi has a massive shipment of inventory arriving for her hair care line by the end of the week. Her current warehouse lease fell through, and she desperately needs a place to store the pallets. This apartment is on the ground floor and has a loading door in the back. It is perfect for her products. Since you only work on your little computer all day, you can easily do that from a coffee shop or a motel. Your sister has a real business to run, Maya. She needs the space more than you do." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, marveling at the absolute audacity of her demand. She was standing in what she believed was my only home, casually ordering me onto the street, so her golden child could have a free storage unit for a failing cosmetic brand. "You are kicking me out of my apartment so Naomi can store boxes of hair serum," I asked, my tone completely level. "Do not use that tone with me, Maya." She snapped, her lips pressing into a thin, angry line. "This family is under an immense amount of pressure right now. Connor is closing a massive venture capital deal, and Naomi needs her launch to be absolutely flawless to support his new public image. We all have to make sacrifices for the greater good of the family name. It is exactly like what I had to do 7 years ago when you were being completely selfish about your education." She was actually going there. I leaned back in my chair, letting her dig her own grave. "You mean when you drained my entire college savings account?" I asked calmly. "I reallocated family resources," Vivian corrected smoothly, not a single ounce of remorse in her voice. "Naomi was marrying a Vance. Do you have any idea what it costs to throw a destination wedding in the Bahamas for 200 of Atlanta's most elite families? We had to project the right image. Your father and I made a calculated decision. A law degree for you was a gamble, but aligning our family with Connor's old money connections was a guaranteed return on investment. You survived working 3 jobs to pay off your student loans, did you not? So you will survive finding a new apartment by Friday." The sheer entitlement radiating from her was almost suffocating. For my entire life, I had let her step all over me in the name of family loyalty. I had cried myself to sleep in cramped dorm rooms, wondering why I was never enough to deserve the same financial security they threw at Naomi. But the woman sitting at that table today was not the broken college student they remembered. I stood up without saying a word. I walked into the bedroom, pulled a canvas duffel bag from the closet, and began throwing a few decoy sweaters and jeans into it. Vivian followed me, standing in the bedroom doorway with a smug, satisfied smile. She mistook my silence for submission. She thought she had won, just like she always did. "I am glad you are finally learning to be cooperative," she said, watching me zip the bag closed. "And let me make one thing perfectly clear, Maya. If you try to fight this eviction, or if you cause any more dramatic scenes to embarrass your sister in front of Connor, I will personally have your father freeze the remaining balance of your grandfather's trust fund. You will not see a single dime of that money until you learn to respect your place in this family hierarchy." I paused, my hand resting on the zipper of the duffel bag. I turned around to face my mother, taking in her perfectly manicured appearance and her absolute delusion of power. I walked past her back into the kitchen and picked up the eviction notice she had thrown on the table. I looked at the legal jargon printed on the page, and then I let out a low, genuine laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated amusement that caused Vivian's smug smile to falter. "What is so funny?" she demanded, her voice rising in irritation. I handed the paper back to her, holding it out until she reluctantly took it. "You cannot evict me, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, steady cadence. "In order to evict a tenant, you actually have to own the building, or at the very least you have to be the landlord." "We do own the building," she snapped. Your father bought this complex 5 years ago through his holding company. He did, I agreed, until he quietly sold it to an anonymous real estate conglomerate last year to cover the massive losses from his failed golf course investment. That conglomerate is called Apex Holdings. I bought the property management company that owns this building, Mom. In fact, my firm owns every single commercial and residential property in this entire zip code. Vivienne stared at me, her eyes widening slightly as the words failed to immediately compute in her brain. What are you talking about? You do not have that kind of money. You are a freelance coder. I am a data architect. I corrected softly, and I built an algorithm that predicts commercial real estate fluctuations better than any firm on Wall Street. I am the sole owner of Apex Holdings. This building belongs to me. So no, Mom, I will not be vacating the premises for Naomi's hair products. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The color was slowly draining from her face as she looked around the cheap apartment, suddenly realizing it was nothing more than a theatrical set piece designed to keep her blind. Oh, and Mom, I added, walking past her toward the front door duffel bag slung over my shoulder. Since we are on the topic of real estate, you should probably know that your lease at the country club estate is up for renewal. I bought that debt portfolio too. Your rent is severely past due, and I expect payment in full by the end of the month. 2 days later, the heavy mahogany doors of the Magnolia Country Club Founders Room stood closed, guarding the most exclusive dining area in the entire building. Inside that room, my family was waiting. They were practically sweating through their designer clothes, desperate for a meeting they believed would save them from total financial ruin. Connor had called in every single favor he had left to secure a sit-down with the anonymous CEO of Apex Holdings. He needed a massive capital injection to cover up the millions he had lost in bad venture capital trades, and he needed it today. My father Marcus and my mother Vivienne were there to lend their high society credibility, while Naomi was undoubtedly there to look pretty and secure her own future. I did not wear a simple green dress this time. I walked through the main lobby of the country club wearing a custom-tailored charcoal gray suit that hugged my frame perfectly, paired with a silk ivory blouse and heels that cost more than my parents' first mortgage. The valet who had sneered at my rental car just a few nights ago had rushed to open the door of my brand-new chauffeur-driven Maybach. The front desk staff, who usually looked right through me, suddenly stood up a little straighter as I walked past. Money has a scent, and today I was completely drenched in it. I pushed open the double doors to the founder's room without knocking. The air inside smelled of aged leather, expensive cigars, and sheer desperation. Connor was pacing back and forth near the private bar, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Naomi was reapplying her lipstick in the reflection of a silver serving tray. My parents were sitting on the velvet sofa looking tense. When the doors clicked shut behind me, all four of their heads snapped in my direction. The silence in the room was absolute until Connor let out a harsh, mocking sound of pure disbelief. "What in the world are you doing here?" Connor demanded, his face immediately twisting into a sneer of disgust. He slammed his crystal glass down on the bar. "How did you even get past the front gate, Maya? This is a private meeting room for actual club members, not a homeless shelter for dropouts." Naomi dropped her lipstick into her purse and let out a dramatic groan, throwing her hands up in the air. "Are you literally stalking us now, Maya? Is this a joke? You get kicked out of my birthday party, so you follow us to Connor's business meeting. You are absolutely psychotic. Mom, tell her to get out before she ruins everything again." Vivienne stood up, her face pale with social panic. She looked around the empty room as if the anonymous billionaire they were waiting for might be hiding behind the curtains. "Maya, you need to leave right this instant," she hissed, keeping her voice low but frantic. "We are expecting a very important investor from Apex Holdings. Connor is about to secure a multi-million-dollar lifeline for his firm, and if you do anything to jeopardize this deal, I swear you will never hear the end of it." I did not move a single inch. I stood near the head of the long, polished dining table, calmly buttoning the center button of my suit jacket. "I am not stalking anyone, Naomi," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the large, quiet room. and I am well aware of what this meeting is about. I am here for the Apex Holdings presentation. My father Marcus finally stood up. His face was turning that familiar, dangerous shade of purple, a clear sign that his legendary temper was about to boil over. He marched toward me, stopping just inches from my face, trying to use his height to intimidate me the way he had done my entire life. "You are playing a very dangerous game, little girl," my father growled, his voice vibrating with rage. "You have been a complete embarrassment to this family since the day you refused to take your education seriously. You think you can just wander into the founder's room wearing a rented suit and pretend you belong in the same room as real business people. You are nothing. Connor is building an empire and you are trying to tear it down because you are a bitter, jealous failure. I will not let you ruin my son-in-law's future." I looked right into my father's angry eyes, feeling absolutely nothing. No fear, no sadness, just a cold, clinical observation of a man who was about to lose his entire world. "Connor is not building an empire, Dad," I said smoothly. "Connor is drowning. His firm is $30 million in debt because he illegally shorted tech stocks and lost. He is begging Apex Holdings for a bailout because his old money trust fund ran dry 3 years ago." Connor's face went completely white. His jaw dropped, and he looked at my parents in pure panic before turning his rage back on me. He lunged toward the table, slamming his fist down on the polished wood. "You shut your mouth, you pathetic liar!" Connor shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I am done dealing with you." "Security!" he yelled toward the back door of the room where a private club guard was stationed. The guard stepped forward, looking uncertain. "Throw this woman out of the club!" Connor ordered, his voice cracking with desperation. "She is trespassing and she is harassing club members. Drag her out by her hair if you have to, just get her out of here before the CEO of Apex arrives." My father nodded firmly, crossing his arms. "You heard him," he told the guard. "Remove my daughter from the premises immediately. She is no longer welcome at Magnolia." The security guard took 2 heavy steps toward me, reaching his hand out to grab my arm. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I just kept my eyes locked on Connor, watching the sweat bead on his forehead. But before the guard could touch my sleeve, the heavy mahogany doors at the front of the room swung wide open again. Everyone froze. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Sterling, the president of the Magnolia Country Club. He was a man notorious for his ruthless snobbery, a man who had kissed my parents' feet for years because of their perceived wealth. My father immediately relaxed his face instantly, transforming into a mask of charming high society grace. "Arthur," my father said, stepping forward with a warm, welcoming smile. "I am so terribly sorry for this disruption. My daughter was just leaving. We are waiting for the head of Apex Holdings, and we wanted the room to be absolutely perfect." Mr. Sterling did not smile back. He did not even look at my father. Instead, he walked straight past Marcus, straight past a bewildered Connor, and stopped directly in front of me. To the absolute shock of everyone in the room, the notoriously arrogant club president lowered his head and bowed slightly. "Miss Maya," Mr. Sterling said, his voice filled with absolute deference and respect. "I apologize for the delay. The staff has prepared the private viewing balcony for your post-meeting lunch, just as you requested." My father let out a confused, nervous laugh. "Arthur, what are you doing? Why are you bowing to her? She is just a freelancer. Tell security to throw her out." Mr. Sterling finally turned his head to look at my father. His expression was cold and completely devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for the Wilson family. "Mr. Marcus," Mr. Sterling said, his voice ringing out clearly in the silent room, "I strongly suggest you step away from our new majority owner and the CEO of Apex Holdings. Miss Maya bought the Magnolia Country Club yesterday morning. You are standing in her building." The heavy mahogany doors of the founder's room clicked shut as Arthur Sterling walked out, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. My father Marcus slowly sank onto the plush velvet sofa, his mouth opening and closing, as his brain completely failed to process what had just happened. My mother, Vivian, was frozen in place, her hand gripping the back of a leather chair so tightly her knuckles were completely white. Naomi looked like she had just seen a ghost. But it was Connor who reacted first, and his reaction was a textbook display of a fragile ego violently rejecting reality. Connor let out a harsh barking laugh that echoed awkwardly off the wood-paneled walls. He ran a hand through his expensive hair and began pacing the length of the room, shaking his head. "Do not fall for this!" Marcus Connor said, his voice loud and frantic. "This is a scam! It is an elaborate, pathetic scam. She is not the CEO of Apex Holdings. Look at her. She is a college dropout who plays on a laptop in a cheap apartment. Some real estate firm probably hired her as a diversity figurehead or a shell director for a tax write-off. There is absolutely no way this freelance nobody actually owns this country club." I stood perfectly still, letting his desperate insults wash over me. It was fascinating to watch a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of wealth try to claw his way out of a corner. "You think you can play games in the venture capital world?" Maya Connor sneered, marching back toward me and pointing his finger directly at my face. "I am a Vance. My family has been moving money in this city since before you were even born. I have connections at every major bank on the Eastern Seaboard. I will personally see to it that you are investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission for corporate fraud. I will have you blacklisted from every boardroom in the country. By the time my lawyers are done with you, you will be begging to go back to your miserable little freelance life." Naomi immediately jumped in, rushing to stand by her husband's side, linking her arm through his. She tilted her chin up, giving me that familiar look of supreme disgust. "My husband is right, Maya," she spat. "You have always been a manipulative liar. Connor comes from real old money. You cannot just walk in here and intimidate us with fake titles. We are untouchable." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power does not have to shout. I simply reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my sleek black encrypted tablet. I walked over to the center of the massive dining table, tapped the screen to unlock it, and projected a series of financial documents onto the large smart television mounted on the wall behind me. "Old money is a beautiful concept, Naomi," I said, keeping my tone surgical and completely devoid of empathy. "It implies a legacy of wealth passed down through generations. The problem is Connor's grandfather was the last Vance who actually knew how to make a dollar. Your husband here has only ever known how to spend it." I swiped my finger across the tablet, and a highly detailed banking ledger appeared on the screen. "For the last 5 years, you made me sit at the far end of the table during family holidays, Connor," I continued, my eyes locking onto his pale face. "You bragged about your 8-figure deals, you poured $1,000 bottles of wine, and you constantly belittled my company as a cute little computer project. But the truth is, your family trust fund was completely liquidated 3 years ago. You have been broke for 36 months. "That is a lie," Naomi shrieked, her voice cracking. "We just bought a summer house in the Hamptons. We fly private. You are just jealous of our lifestyle." I swiped the screen again, bringing up a complex web of trading accounts. "You lease private jets on credit, Naomi?" I corrected her smoothly. "And that summer house is mortgaged to the absolute maximum limit." But that is not even the worst part. Connor's venture capital firm has not closed a legitimate profitable deal in over 2 years. To maintain the illusion of your perfect high society lifestyle, Connor has been doing something incredibly dangerous. He has been illegally shorting emerging technology stocks, betting massive amounts of his clients' money that those companies would fail. Connor's face morphed from pale white to a sickly shade of gray. He took a step back, his mouth hanging open, unable to formulate a single word of defense. He knew exactly what was on that screen. He specifically targeted artificial intelligence companies because he is arrogant and he does not understand modern technology, I explained, looking directly at my father, who was now staring at the screen in absolute horror. Connor thought he could easily crush these small tech startups and pocket the difference. But he made one fatal mistake. He aggressively shorted the stocks of 3 specific AI data firms without realizing that all 3 of those firms are subsidiaries of Apex Holdings. My subsidiaries. The silence in the room was deafening. The realization of what I was saying was slowly sinking into Connor's terrified brain. He had tried to bankrupt my companies using money he did not even have, and he had completely trapped himself in a corner. When I saw the aggressive short positions being taken against my tech firms by your specific accounts, Connor, I decided to do a little trading of my own, I said quietly, tapping the final document onto the screen. I spent the last 48 hours quietly buying up the available float of those exact stocks. I cornered the market. You bet that my companies would fail, but instead their value just skyrocketed. Connor began to shake. His hands trembled so violently he had to grip the edge of the mahogany table just to stay standing. You cannot do this, he whispered, his voice completely broken. You cannot squeeze me like this, Maya. I looked down at my tablet and pressed a single green button on the screen. I just executed a market squeeze on your short positions, Connor, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Your broker is forcing you to cover your positions at the new premium price. As of exactly 3 seconds ago, you are currently $30 million in debt, and your firm is officially insolvent. The very second those words left my mouth, the agonizing silence in the room was shattered. Connor's phone, sitting right there on the polished wood table, began to ring frantically. Then his secondary business phone in his pocket started vibrating wildly. 72 hours after Connor watched his fake financial empire crumble into dust, my sister Naomi decided to throw the most lavish launch party Atlanta had seen all year. She was desperate. With Connor suddenly drowning in $30 million of debt, Naomi needed her new luxury hair care line to be an instant massive success. She had rented out the grand ballroom of the botanical gardens, filling the space with thousands of imported white orchids and a literal wall of champagne. Influencers and local socialites were buzzing around, snapping pictures for social media. Naomi was working the room in a glittering gold dress, acting as if her life was an absolute fairy tale. I arrived an hour late, and I did not come quietly. I wore a custom crimson gown that swept the floor with a diamond choker that caught every single flash of the photographer cameras. The moment I stepped through the grand archway, the energy in the room completely shifted. Rumors of my recent acquisition of the Magnolia Country Club and my position as the CEO of Apex Holdings had already started whispering through the elite circles. The photographers who were supposed to be documenting Naomi's brand launch immediately turned their lenses toward me. Several high-profile investors abandoned their conversations with my mother to come introduce themselves. From across the room, I saw Naomi's smile freeze. Her eyes widened with absolute fury as the attention of the entire room gravitated away from her hair care displays and directly onto me. She slammed her champagne glass down onto a passing waiter's tray and marched across the ballroom floor, grabbing my arm with nails digging into my skin. We need to talk right now, Naomi hissed, pulling me out of the main ballroom and into a dimly lit service hallway. As soon as the heavy doors swung shut behind us, she completely dropped her picture-perfect socialite persona. Her face was flushed red with rage. "What is wrong with you?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Are you literally obsessed with me, Maya? You just had to come here and ruin my launch, did you not? You cannot stand the fact that I am building a beauty empire. You have spent your entire life trying to steal my shine." I looked down at her hand still clutching my arm, and she quickly let go, stepping back. I leaned against the wall, perfectly calm. "Steal your shine, Naomi?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "You mean like how you intentionally scheduled your engagement party on the exact same weekend as my college graduation, so our parents would not attend my ceremony? Or how you threw a massive tantrum and demanded Mom drain my tuition fund to pay for your custom wedding dress? You have never built an empire in your life. You just take what belongs to other people and slap your name on it." "You are a psycho," Naomi yelled, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "I do not care what kind of fake tech money you think you have now. You are trespassing at my private event. I am calling the police right now and having you dragged out of here in handcuffs. You are a jealous, bitter little girl, and my brand is going to make me 10 times richer than you will ever be." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled a slow, chilling smile that made her hand hover over her phone. "I am not trespassing, Naomi," I replied smoothly. "I am on the VIP guest list. You might want to check with your primary manufacturer before you start calling the authorities. Speaking of which, I believe he is about to give his keynote speech. We should probably get back inside. You would not want to miss your own tribute." Naomi glared at me, her chest heaving with angry breaths, but her desperate need for public validation won out. She smoothed down her gold dress, fixed her hair, and pushed back through the doors into the ballroom, forcing her brilliant fake smile back onto her face. I followed quietly, standing near the back of the room by the towering champagne wall. Up on the beautifully lit stage, a man in a sharp black suit tapped the microphone. It was David, the head of the primary manufacturing facility that produced every single bottle of Naomi's hair serum. The crowd quieted down. Naomi moved to the front row, beaming with pride, expecting a glowing endorsement of her business genius. "Good evening, everyone." David began, his voice echoing through the massive speakers. "We are all here tonight to talk about Crown & Silk, the luxury hair care line presented by Naomi Vance. Naomi has spent the last 6 months promising her investors and her customers that this brand represents the pinnacle of high-end quality and ethical business practices." Naomi nodded graciously to the crowd, soaking in the applause that rippled through the room. My mother Vivian was standing right next to her, clapping loudly. However, David continued, his tone suddenly shifting from celebratory to completely strictly professional. The applause died down instantly. In the business world, true luxury requires actual capital. For the past 4 months, Naomi Vance has failed to pay a single invoice for the production, packaging, or shipping of her products. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Influencers lowered their phones. My mother's hands froze in mid-air. Naomi's face drained of all color, her jaw dropping in absolute shock. "You cannot say this," Naomi yelled up at the stage, her voice cracking in panic. "This is a private launch." David ignored her completely, speaking directly to the silent crowd. "The inventory you see on display tonight was produced on credit. Credit that has now severely defaulted. Because of this massive delinquency, I have been instructed by my parent company to announce that we are permanently shutting down the entire supply chain for Crown & Silk effective immediately." The room erupted into shocked whispers. Investors who had just written checks to Naomi were suddenly pulling out their phones, looking furious. Naomi was shaking her eyes wide with total humiliation as her carefully crafted public image was being publicly executed. "This is a lie," Naomi screamed, tears of genuine panic streaming down her face. "My husband is a venture capitalist. We have millions. Who told you to do this? Who owns your parent company?" David looked down at her with absolutely zero pity. He adjusted the microphone and looked straight over the crowd toward the back of the ballroom. "I will let the owner of the supply chain explain that to you," David said, his voice perfectly clear over the speakers. The stage lights abruptly cut out. A single blinding white spotlight swung across the dark ballroom, cutting through the crowd and landing directly on me. The blinding white light pinned me against the back wall of the ballroom. A collective gasp rippled through the sea of Atlanta elite. Naomi stood frozen on the stage, her perfectly contoured face pale with absolute horror. I took a slow step forward, preparing to walk down the center aisle and explain exactly why her luxury hair care line was officially bankrupt. But before I could even part my lips to speak, a heavy hand clamped down on my bicep like a vice. It was my father. Marcus did not care about the cameras or the whispers. His fingers dug so deeply into my skin it bruised. He practically dragged me backward out of the spotlight and through a set of heavy wooden doors that led to the venue catering kitchens. He shoved me into a small windowless manager office and slammed the door shut, flipping the deadbolt. The charming, charismatic country club patriarch was completely gone. In his place was a desperate, vicious man cornered by his own lies. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat!" He spat, his chest heaving as he backed me against a stainless steel prep table. "I do not know what kind of sick game you are playing, or how you managed to hack into some corporate database to make it look like you own Apex Holdings, but it ends right now. You are going to march back out there and tell everyone this is a massive misunderstanding. I kept my breathing steady, smoothing out the sleeve of my crimson gown where he had grabbed me. I did not hack anything, Dad. I said, my voice dead calm. I built Apex Holdings from the ground up while you and Mom were busy pretending I did not exist. My father let out a harsh, cruel laugh. You built nothing, Maya. You are a college dropout. If you really are sitting on a company worth billions, it is because you stole from us. You used my name, my connections, and probably embezzled from the family trust to fund this little revenge project. I am calling my lawyers the second we leave this room. I am going to sue you for stolen family assets and strip you of every single dime you claim to have. I tilted my head, studying the man who was supposed to protect me. The absolute delusion of his threats was almost laughable. You want to talk about stolen assets, Dad? I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. Let us talk about what happened 5 years ago. Let us talk about that federal business loan. Marcus blinked, his aggressive posture faltering for just a fraction of a second. I pressed forward, not giving him an inch to breathe. 5 years ago, I was living on ramen noodles, working 3 grueling shifts just to keep my electricity on. You and Mom had completely cut me off financially because I refused to follow your strict rules and go to law school. I was entirely on my own, trying to build a future out of nothing. I went to a local bank to apply for a tiny $10,000 business loan. It was a modest amount, just enough to buy the server space I desperately needed to launch my first real estate data algorithm. Do you remember what the loan officer told me that day, Dad? My father swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the locked door, but he kept his jaw set in stubborn defiance. The loan officer looked at me with pure, absolute pity and told me my credit score was completely destroyed. I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous, razor-sharp whisper. He looked at a 24-year-old girl and told me I had recently defaulted on a $2 million federal commercial loan, a massive government loan I never applied for. A loan with my perfectly forged signature stamped on every single page of the closing documents. I stepped even closer, watching the arrogant mask on his face begin to crack. You were so desperate to save your failing commercial real estate investments that you willingly stole your own youngest daughter identity. You took $2 million from the federal government in my name, bailed out your country club buddies, paid off your massive debts, and intentionally left me to take the catastrophic credit hit. You ruined my financial life before it even started, just so you could keep playing golf with the elite and pretending you were a king. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, before a slow, sickening smirk spread across his face. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, leaning back against the door with arrogant confidence. You have a very active imagination, Maya, he sneered. Even if any of that fairy tale were true, you have absolutely no way to prove it. I am a highly respected pillar of the Atlanta business community. You are the family disappointment who makes up stories for attention. Who do you think a judge is going to believe? You think you can just walk into a courtroom and accuse me of federal fraud without a shred of evidence. I will countersue you for defamation so fast your head will spin. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into the hidden pocket of my gown and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. I tossed it onto the metal prep table between us. The heavy thud echoed in the small room. What is this? He demanded, his smirk finally slipping. I did not sue you, Dad, I said softly, keeping my eyes locked dead on his. The FBI did. They have been tracking the wire transfers from that federal loan for 6 months, and I gladly handed over the original forged documents an hour ago. You might want to fix your tie. They are waiting for you in the lobby right now. Before my father could even process the reality of the federal agents waiting for him out in the main lobby, the heavy door of the catering office suddenly burst wide open. My mother, Vivian, stumbled into the room, her eyes darting between the thick manila envelope on the steel table and the absolute terror radiating from my father's pale face. She had always possessed an uncanny survival instinct, a predatory sixth sense that told her exactly when the social hierarchy she worshipped was under attack. She took one look at my calm demeanor and her husband's trembling hands, and she instantly realized we had lost. But Vivian was not a woman who surrendered quietly. She let out a sudden dramatic gasp that sounded like a dying actress on a theatrical stage. Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her chest, clutching the expensive silk of her designer gown. She staggered backward against the doorframe, letting her knees buckle just enough to slide down the wall and collapse onto the cold tile floor. Marcus immediately dropped to his knees beside her, screaming for a doctor, abandoning his arrogant facade entirely. The catering staff rushed in, creating absolute chaos. The federal agents waiting out in the grand lobby were forced to step back as emergency paramedics swarmed the building, loading my mother onto a stretcher, with Marcus clutching her hand and weeping for the flashing cameras. It was a brilliant, desperate tactical maneuver. She bought him exactly 1 hour of freedom. I did not ride in the ambulance. I simply walked out the back exit, stepped into my waiting car, and told my driver to follow them to Atlanta Memorial Hospital. It was the most elite private medical facility in the entire state, a place where the wealthy went to be pampered rather than treated. When I arrived at the VIP emergency wing, the tension in the air was suffocating. I walked past the security desk and pushed open the door to private suite number 1. The room looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a hospital room. Vivian was lying in the center of a massive hospital bed, hooked up to several expensive-looking monitors that were beeping in a slow, steady rhythm. Marcus was pacing at the foot of the bed, while Naomi and Connor hovered nearby, looking thoroughly exhausted by their own collapsing lives. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind me, my mother turned her head slowly on the pillow. She let out a weak, pathetic cough and reached her trembling hand out toward me, playing the role of the dying matriarch to absolute perfection. "Maya," she whispered, her voice raspy and thin, completely devoid of the sharp venom she had used on me just hours ago. "Please come here, Maya. Look at what this terrible stress is doing to my heart. You are tearing our beautiful family apart over silly little misunderstandings." I stood at the foot of her bed, resting my hands on the pristine white blanket, but I did not take her hand. I just watched her perform her desperate little play. "We gave you life." Maya, my mother continued, forcing a single tear to roll down her perfectly powdered cheek. "We put a solid roof over your head. We raised you in the absolute best neighborhoods. Your father is a good man who simply made some complicated business decisions to protect our legacy. You cannot let the federal government take him away like a common criminal. It will literally kill me, Maya. My weak heart simply cannot take the scandal of a federal prison sentence. You need to call those agents right now and tell them you made a massive mistake. Tell them the signatures are real. Drop these ridiculous charges and let us go back to being a family." Before I could even respond to the sheer audacity of her demands, Naomi shoved her way past Connor and marched right up to me. Her face was twisted with genuine hatred. "You are an absolute monster!" Naomi screamed, her voice piercing the quiet hum of the medical monitors. "Look at our mother. She is literally dying in a hospital bed because you decided to throw a temper tantrum over some stupid loan. You are actually trying to murder her just to prove a point to us. You are so sick and twisted, Maya. You have always been a jealous sociopath who wants to destroy everything I love." Connor stepped up right behind Naomi, using his broad shoulders to try and intimidate me the way he always did when things did not go his way. "You need to fix this right now," Connor demanded, pointing a stiff finger directly at my chest. "You call those agents and you tell them you forged those documents yourself to get back at your father. You take the blame for this because you have nothing to lose anyway. You are a bitter little nobody. If her heart fails tonight, it is entirely on your hands, Maya. You are destroying a legacy you could never even understand." I looked at the three of them, Marcus cowering in the corner, Naomi screaming like a spoiled child, and Connor trying to command a room he had absolutely zero authority in. Then I looked at the heart monitor next to my mother's bed. The glowing green line was bouncing along with a perfectly healthy, completely unstressed rhythm. The heavy, solid wood door of the VIP suite swung open, and the room instantly fell completely silent. Dr. Richard Harrison, the chief of cardiology, walked into the room holding a sleek digital medical chart. He was a highly respected man who did not suffer fools or tolerate the dramatic antics of the wealthy elite. He did not rush to my mother's bedside. He did not look concerned at all. He simply stood at the end of the bed and reviewed the data on his screen with a cold, clinical expression. Marcus rushed forward, wiping fake sweat from his brow. "Doctor, please tell us she is going to survive." Marcus begged, his voice shaking with artificial grief. Her chest pains were incredibly severe. "We need your best surgical team on standby right now." Dr. Harrison slowly lowered his digital tablet and looked directly at Vivian. "Mrs. Vivian, your EKG is perfectly normal." Dr. Harrison stated, his voice flat and professional, echoing loudly in the tense room. "Your blood pressure is optimal. Your oxygen levels are flawless, and your cardiac enzymes show absolutely zero signs of stress. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your heart." Vivienne sat up slightly, her weak, dying mother persona instantly vanishing into thin air. She glared at the doctor, her face flushing with indignant rage. "You must be looking at the wrong chart," she snapped, dropping the raspy, fragile voice entirely. "I am having severe palpitations. I demand you run the tests again and admit me for a week of observation immediately." Dr. Harrison did not flinch. He simply turned his head and looked at me with a deep, respectful nod. "I will let the chairman of the board handle the rest of this conversation, Miss Maya," Dr. Harrison said, stepping back toward the open door. My parents froze in absolute shock. Naomi stopped breathing. Connor stared at the doctor as if the man had just spoken in a foreign language. I walked around the edge of the bed and picked up the digital medical chart, resting my hand on the cold metal railing. I smiled down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. "Your heart is perfectly fine, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy cadence. "But your bank account is flatlining. I bought this entire hospital network 6 months ago through Apex Holdings. I am the chairman of the board, and my hospital does not tolerate wealthy socialites wasting critical medical resources to commit insurance fraud and dodge the FBI. So you can either get out of my bed right now, or I will have security carry you out to the federal agents waiting in the parking lot." I left the VIP suite without looking back, leaving my parents and Connor to deal with the hospital administration and the federal agents, who were undoubtedly on their way up. The hospital cafeteria was completely empty, at this hour smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. I bought a black coffee and sat in a corner booth, letting the absolute silence wash over me. The adrenaline from the confrontation in the hospital room was slowly fading, leaving behind a cold, clinical clarity. I had successfully dismantled every single lie my family had built their lives upon, but I knew they were not the type of people to surrender gracefully. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals always make one last desperate strike. 10 minutes later, the quiet hum of the cafeteria was broken by the sound of expensive heels clicking rapidly against the linoleum floor. Naomi slid into the booth directly across from me. Her glittering gold dress looked entirely ridiculous in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital. Her immaculate makeup was slightly smudged, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw genuine desperation in my older sister's eyes. She did not sneer at me. She did not raise her voice to demand my immediate submission. Instead, she reached across the cheap laminate table and tried to grab my hands. I pulled my hands back, wrapping them tightly around my warm paper cup. I just stared at her, waiting to see what new angle she was attempting to play. "Maya, please," she whispered, her voice cracking with beautifully manufactured emotion. "We have to stop this right now. This war between us is going to destroy our entire family. Look at what is happening to Mom and Dad. Look at what is happening to my marriage. I know we have had our differences, but we are blood. We are sisters." I did not say a word. I let her sit in the silence, forcing her to keep talking. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "It is hard enough out there for us, Maya," she continued, playing her ultimate card. "You know exactly how the corporate world treats Black women. We have to work 10 times harder just to get a single seat at the table. We face so much opposition every single day. We should not be tearing each other down like this. We should be protecting each other. We should be building each other up. Imagine what we could do if we joined forces. We could merge your tech wealth with my beauty brand. We could be an unstoppable sister duo in Atlanta." I am so sorry for how I treated you in the past. I was just projecting my own insecurities because I was jealous of how smart you are. She let a single tear roll down her cheek, wiping it away with a trembling finger. Please, Maya, just tell me how you pulled off that short squeeze against Connor. She pleaded, her tone dripping with artificial vulnerability. Tell me exactly what you did with Dad's loan documents to get the FBI involved. If we are going to be partners moving forward, I need to know the whole truth so we can fix this massive mess together. Just tell me your side of the story so I can understand. It was a masterful performance. The tears welling in her eyes, the shaking in her voice, the calculated appeal to our shared struggle as Black women navigating ruthless business environments. 10 years ago, I might have actually believed her. I might have dropped my guard and confided in the older sister I had always secretly wanted. But I was no longer the desperate younger sister seeking validation from a family that despised me. I was a data architect, and my entire career was built on noticing the smallest anomalies in seemingly perfect patterns. My eyes drifted from her pleading, tear-stained face down to the designer bag resting on the table right between us. The gold zipper was pulled back just a fraction of an inch, intentionally left open. Deep inside the dark leather interior, I caught the faint, rhythmic pulse of a tiny red blinking light. The realization hit me instantly. She was wearing a wire. Naomi was not here for a sisterly truce. She was here to bait me into a recorded confession. She wanted me to admit on tape that I had illegally manipulated Connor's stocks, or that I had somehow fabricated the federal evidence against our father. She was trying to gather illegal surveillance ammunition for their upcoming criminal defense trials and civil lawsuits. They thought they could outsmart me in a game of digital warfare. I did not get angry. I did not scream or throw my hot coffee in her face. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a small rectangular black device. It looked like a thick external hard drive, but it was significantly heavier. I set it down on the table right next to her designer bag and pressed the silver button on the side. A high-pitched electronic hum vibrated through the air for a split second before falling completely silent. Naomi stopped talking mid-sentence, staring at the little black box in utter confusion. "What is that?" she asked, her voice dropping the sweet, sisterly tone completely. "It is a military-grade signal jammer," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. "It completely scrambles all audio recording equipment, cellular signals, and wireless transmissions within a 20-foot radius." "Your recording failed, Naomi. The red light inside your bag is completely dead. You can stop playing the victim now." Naomi's face went completely pale. The fake tears dried up instantly. She snatched her bag off the table, pulling the zipper shut with a violent yank, realizing her last desperate play had just crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. "You are sick," she spat, her true colors finally showing through the cracks. "You are a paranoid sociopath, Maya. You planned this entire thing just to humiliate us. You think you are so invincible because you have a little bit of money now, but you are still just the family loser. You will never be anything else." I took a slow sip of my coffee, leaning back against the vinyl booth and smiling genuinely for the first time all evening. "Oh, and Naomi," I said casually, setting the cup down on the table. "Since we were just talking about your beauty brand and building a sisterly empire together, I thought you should probably know about my latest corporate acquisition. When I found out your hair care line was officially going bankrupt, I took the liberty of looking up your intellectual property filings. You were so busy throwing lavish launch parties and trying to impress high society investors that you completely forgot to secure your own trademarks." Naomi froze her hand, gripping the strap of her designer bag so hard her knuckles turned pure white. She stared at me, her breathing suddenly turning shallow and rapid. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I bought the trademark to your name," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, steady whisper. "I own the commercial rights to Naomi Vance and Naomi Beauty in all 50 states. You cannot sell a single bottle of serum, you cannot launch a single product, and you cannot even legally call yourself Naomi in a business setting without paying me a 70% royalty fee." I left Naomi standing in the hospital cafeteria clutching her useless wiretapped bag and walked out into the damp night air. The concrete parking garage adjacent to the hospital was dimly lit and completely deserted at this late hour. My heels echoed sharply against the pavement as I made my way toward my waiting car. I was exhausted, but my mind was operating with razor-sharp precision. I knew the fallout from tonight was far from over, but I did not expect the next attack to happen before I even reached my driver. A tall shadow detached itself from the concrete pillar near my vehicle. Connor stepped directly into my path, blocking my way. His designer suit jacket was unbuttoned, and his silk tie was pulled loose, hanging haphazardly around his neck. The charming, sophisticated smile he usually wore for high society galas was completely gone. His face was twisted into an ugly sneer of pure desperation and absolute rage. He had slipped away from my mother's fake hospital room to handle me himself. "You think you are so incredibly smart, do you not? Maya," he spat, his voice dripping with venom and heavy condescension. He took a step closer, trying to use his height and physical presence to intimidate me, just like my father always did. "You think because you manipulated some stock algorithms and scraped together some new tech money that you are suddenly untouchable. You need to learn your place. You are a black woman playing a game designed by and for men like me. My family has been moving the financial markets in this country for 4 generations. We built the tables you are trying to sit at. We own the very ground you are walking on." I stood my ground, looking up at him with a perfectly blank expression. I did not cross my arms. I did not shrink back. "Go on, Connor," I said smoothly. "I love hearing about the magnificent Vance family history. Please tell me more about your legacy." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh, stepping so close I could smell the stale scotch on his breath. "I am going to ruin you," he threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious, dangerous whisper. "You squeezed my short positions and embarrassed me in front of my investors, but you have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. Tomorrow morning, I am making exactly 3 phone calls to the board members of the largest venture capital firms in the world. They are my golf partners. They are my fraternity brothers. They are my blood. I will use every single favor my family has to have your entire company blacklisted across the globe. No bank will ever lend to you. No firm will ever partner with you, and Apex Holdings will be choked out of the market by Friday. You will lose everything, and you will finally remember what it feels like to be an absolute nobody." I did not blink. I did not step back. I let him finish his entire pathetic monologue, letting the silence stretch between us for a long, agonizing moment. Then I slowly reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted tablet for the second time that night. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Connor," I said, my voice steady and cold, cutting through the damp garage air like a knife. "The Vance family has been moving markets for 4 generations. Your great-grandfather built a massive regional bank from the ground up. Your grandfather expanded it across the eastern seaboard. Your father inherited it. And you were supposed to be the golden heir who took the entire operation global. But you were all too busy relying on the privilege of your last name to realize that the world was changing right beneath your feet." I tapped the screen of my tablet, bringing up a highly classified financial dossier. "You see, Connor, while you were out at country clubs bragging about your heritage and looking down on people like me, I was spending the last 3 years doing something very specific. My data algorithms are designed to find hidden market vulnerabilities, and I found a massive one. I have been systematically buying up the Vance family debt." Connor froze. His eyes darted down to the glowing screen in my hands, but he refused to look closely. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his arrogant facade cracking instantly. "My family bank is a financial institution. We do not have debt. We have assets. Every institution has weak points." "Connor," I explained, speaking to him as if he were a slow child. "Your father made terrible commercial real estate investments during the market crash. He quietly took out massive, uncollateralized loans from overseas lenders to keep the Vance Bank afloat and hide his massive losses. He thought no one would ever find out, Because old money protects old money. But I am not old money. I am the woman you ignored at every family dinner. I tracked down every single one of those foreign loans over the past 36 months, and Apex Holdings purchased them all at a massive premium. He shook his head, backing away from me. No, he whispered, his breathing suddenly turning rapid and shallow. That is impossible. You do not have the capital to buy institutional bank debt. It would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. I have capital you cannot even comprehend. I corrected him, stepping forward and forcing him to retreat until his back hit the cold concrete pillar. I own the paper on your entire family legacy, Connor. I hold the markers on your father's estate, on the bank's commercial assets, and on the very trust funds you used to buy your designer suits and fund Naomi's failing business. I did not just squeeze your personal stock positions tonight. I orchestrated a complete financial siege on your entire bloodline. Connor was hyperventilating now. The arrogant, entitled man who had just threatened to blacklist me globally was literally trembling against a concrete wall in a hospital parking garage. His hands were shaking violently as he patted his pockets blindly, looking for a phone that could not possibly save him. The reality of his complete destruction was suffocating him. I held out my tablet directly in front of his face. The screen displayed a live feed of global market data and a press release that had been scheduled to go public at midnight. "Read it, Connor," I commanded, my voice slicing through the quiet night. He stared at the screen, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he read the bold headline flashing across the financial news feed. "I just converted all of your father's defaulted debt into equity," I said softly, watching the last shred of his pride evaporate into the darkness. "Your father's bank was just acquired in a hostile takeover. Your family works for me now, Connor." The morning sun reflecting off the polished wings of my private Gulfstream was the perfect remedy for a sleepless night. I stood on the private tarmac of the Atlanta Executive Airport, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of jet fuel and expensive leather. After dismantling Connor in the hospital parking garage, I knew exactly what their next move would be. When people who build their entire existence on public perception are backed into a corner, they do not surrender or reflect on their actions. They put on a filter and post a story. They run away to beautiful places and pretend their ugly reality does not exist. Right on cue, a black luxury transport vehicle pulled up to the security checkpoint of the private aviation terminal. I watched over the rim of my glass as Naomi and Connor stepped out into the morning light. They were a walking masterclass in absolute delusion. Naomi was dressed in a flowing silk resort gown, complete with a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized designer sunglasses. She held her phone up at arm's length, smiling brightly into the camera lens. I could hear her high-pitched, overly enthusiastic voice carrying across the quiet tarmac as she spoke to her digital audience. She was giving her followers a live update about their spontaneous romantic getaway to the exclusive Nujuma Island. She spun around gracefully, showing off the pristine exterior of the private terminal, pretending that the weight of their financial ruin was not currently crushing her chest. She giggled and leaned into Connor, forcing him into the frame. Connor stood beside her, looking pale and visibly tense, but he dutifully forced a stiff, arrogant smile for the camera. He adjusted his expensive linen suit, desperately clinging to the illusion of his untouchable wealth. They were literally trying to outrun their bankruptcy by booking a luxury vacation they could no longer afford just to maintain their social media image for a few more days. It was a pathetic display of vanity masking pure terror. I took a slow sip of my champagne and watched the inevitable collision happen. As they approached the heavy double-glass doors leading to the private boarding gates, a towering security guard stepped directly into their path. He held up a massive hand, firmly blocking them from entering the luxury lounge. Connor immediately dropped his fake smile the moment the camera panned away. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon the generational authority he had wielded just 24 hours ago. "Excuse me," Connor snapped, his voice echoing with arrogant indignation. We have a chartered flight waiting on runway 4. I am Connor Vance, and you need to step aside right now before I have your supervisor terminate your employment." The security guard did not flinch. He simply crossed his thick arms over his chest and shook his head, looking down at Connor with complete apathy. "I do not care who you are, sir," the guard replied in a flat, bored tone. "You are not on the cleared guest list for this terminal, and your flight plan has been officially grounded." Naomi lowered her phone, her perfect influencer smile completely vanishing into a mask of ugly entitlement. She glared at the guard leaning forward with unbelievable audacity. Grounded, she demanded, her voice shrill and grating. "Do you have any idea how much influence I have? I am doing a highly paid sponsored travel series for Nujuma Island. You are ruining my content schedule and costing me thousands of dollars. Let us through immediately, or I will drag this entire aviation company on every single social platform I own and make sure you never work in this city again." I decided they had humiliated themselves enough for one morning. I stepped out from the shadow of my massive jet, walking slowly toward the security gate. My heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, drawing their immediate attention. Naomi and Connor both turned their heads, and the remaining color completely drained from their faces as they saw me standing there entirely unbothered. Maya Connor hissed, his hands balling into tight fists at his sides as he recognized me. "What are you doing here? Did you actually follow us to the airport? Tell this idiot security guard to let us through right now. We are going to Nujuma Island, and we are not dealing with your psychotic revenge games today. We are done playing with you." I stopped just on the other side of the glass doors, taking another slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. I looked at Naomi, who was frantically trying to hide her phone behind her back, as if she had not just been caught faking a luxury lifestyle while her family empire burned to the ground. I admired the absolute panic swirling behind her oversized sunglasses. "You are not going anywhere, Connor," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm, contrasting sharply with his frantic energy. "I find it endlessly fascinating that your first instinct after losing your entire family bank is to rent a cheap charter plane and flee to an island resort just so Naomi can post bikini pictures and pretend you are not completely broke. It is actually pathetic that you care more about your digital footprint than your actual financial survival." Naomi stepped up to the glass, her face twisted in pure rage. "Shut up, Maya!" she screamed, hitting the thick glass with the palm of her hand. "We do not owe you any explanations. We are leaving this toxic family drama behind. We are taking a much-needed vacation to Nujuma Island, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop us. You do not control the airport." I smiled, looking at her with a mixture of pity and absolute triumph. "You really do not pay attention to the real world around you, Naomi," I said, shaking my head slightly. "You spend so much time curating your fake life on the internet that you never bother to read actual financial news. If you had, you would know exactly why your flight plan was rejected this morning." Connor grabbed the heavy metal handle of the door, pulling on it aggressively, but the security lock held it firm. "Open the door, Maya," he demanded, his voice cracking with sheer desperation as he realized his power meant nothing here. "We paid for a private charter. You cannot legally stop us from boarding our plane." I took one step closer to the glass, resting my free hand gracefully against the cool surface. "I am not stopping you from boarding your little rented plane, Connor," I explained, keeping my tone incredibly polite and measured. "I am stopping you from landing at your destination." Naomi scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "You cannot stop us from landing at Nujuma Island. It is a private luxury resort. It is highly exclusive, and they are expecting us." I smiled, swirling the remaining champagne in my glass before meeting her angry, desperate stare. "It is extremely exclusive, Naomi," I agreed softly, leaning in close to the glass. "Access is entirely denied to my private island. I bought Nujuma Island 3 weeks ago as a secure corporate retreat for Apex Holdings. It is completely off-limits to the public, and it is especially off-limits to bankrupt socialites trying to fake their wealth on the internet." Naomi gasped, taking a physical step backward as if I had just struck her across the face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The realization that I owned the very paradise she was trying to use to save her social status completely shattered her reality. Connor stared at me, his chest heaving with defeated, ragged breaths. He looked like a broken man who had just realized he was standing at the edge of an infinitely deep cliff with nowhere left to run. Oh, and Connor, I added casually, taking one final sip of my drink and turning to walk back toward my jet. I would not worry too much about the flight plan anyway. The charter company just called my aviation manager. Your credit card declined. While Naomi and Connor were trapped on a private tarmac thousands of miles away, staring at the ashes of their ruined luxury vacation, my parents were back in Atlanta, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of their untouchable wealth. Marcus and Vivian had decided that the best way to handle the looming threat of a federal investigation was to completely ignore it and throw one of their notoriously extravagant dinner parties. They believed that if they surrounded themselves with enough powerful people, the reality of their collapsing empire could not possibly reach them. The grand dining room of their West Paces Ferry estate was illuminated by 3 massive crystal chandeliers, casting a warm golden glow over the long mahogany table. 20 of Atlanta elite were seated around the room, including a state senator, 2 Superior Court judges, and several prominent real estate developers. Vivian was in her element, wearing a stunning emerald green gown and a diamond necklace that she had likely purchased on credit just days prior. She was laughing brightly at a joke made by the senator, completely ignoring the fact that her husband was sweating through his tailored tuxedo. Marcus sat at the head of the table, gripping his crystal glass of expensive scotch so tightly his knuckles were white. He was speaking loudly, boasting about a fictitious commercial development project he claimed to be launching next quarter. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime trying to convince the most powerful men in the city that the Vance family was as financially invincible as ever. He thought that if he served them enough imported caviar and poured enough vintage wine, they would eagerly step in to protect him when the federal indictments inevitably dropped. The caterers were moving silently around the room, clearing the salad plates and preparing to serve the main course. The atmosphere was a perfect symphony of clinking silver and arrogant laughter. It was the exact type of high society echo chamber my parents had used to shield themselves from consequence their entire lives. But the symphony was abruptly shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps echoing loudly across the marble foyer. The massive oak doors of the formal dining room were suddenly pushed open, not by the catering staff, but by 3 men wearing cheap off-the-rack suits. They did not look like politicians or wealthy developers. They looked like men who carried very bad news for a living. The conversation at the table died instantly. The senator lowered his wine glass. The judges exchanged confused glances. Vivian froze, her bright artificial smile slipping from her face as she stared at the intruders. "Excuse me," Marcus barked, standing up from his chair and throwing his linen napkin onto the table. "This is a private residence and a closed event. Who let you in here, and what exactly do you think you are doing interrupting my dinner party?" The lead process server, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a completely indifferent expression, did not even blink at the display of arrogant authority. He simply walked straight down the length of the long mahogany table, ignoring the horrified gasps of the wealthy guests. He stopped directly in front of Marcus, reaching into his scuffed leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy rubber band and slapped them down right in the center of the pristine white tablecloth. The impact knocked over a crystal water goblet, sending a pool of water soaking into the expensive fabric. "Marcus Vance," the server said in a loud, clear voice that carried to every corner of the silent room, "you have been officially served. These are formal notices of immediate foreclosure and asset seizure for this property and all attached estates. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises before the locks are changed by county sheriffs." Vivian let out a strangled cry, pressing her hands over her mouth as the guests around her began to whisper frantically. The illusion of their massive wealth had just been violently slaughtered in front of the exact people they were trying to impress. Marcus turned beet red, his face twisting into a mask of pure, aggressive denial. He picked up the heavy stack of papers and threw them back onto the table, waving his hands wildly at his elite friends. "It is a prank," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic as he desperately tried to laugh it off. Please, everyone, do not be alarmed. This is nothing but a sick, pathetic joke. My estranged daughter Maya is a deeply disturbed young woman. She has always been incredibly jealous of our success, and she is currently suffering from a severe mental breakdown. She is a deranged sociopath who hired these actors to pull a stunt just to ruin our beautiful evening. I will be having her arrested for harassment first thing in the morning. Vivienne immediately joined in, dabbing at her dry eyes and looking pleadingly at the senator. It is a tragedy, she cried, playing the role of the heartbroken mother. We gave that girl everything, and she repays us with this vicious public humiliation. She is simply out of her mind with jealousy. I waited until the echo of her fake sobs faded into the quiet room before I stepped through the open oak doors. I was not wearing an emerald gown or a tailored tuxedo. I was wearing a sharp black business suit, and I was not alone. Flanking me on either side were 4 highly trained armed private security contractors. The heavy thud of their tactical boots against the marble floor sent a shockwave of genuine fear through the dining room. The elite guests parted, instantly pulling their chairs back and pressing themselves against the walls, desperate to distance themselves from the sinking ship. I walked slowly toward the head of the table, my eyes locked dead on my father. He stopped breathing, his mouth hanging slightly open as the color drained from his face completely. He looked at the armed men standing behind me and finally realized that his country club connections could not save him from the reality of his own actions. I stopped right next to the spilled water goblet and looked down at the foreclosure documents, then up at the terrified man who had spent my entire life trying to break my spirit. "It is no prank," I said, my voice steady and perfectly clear, slicing through the heavy silence of the room so every single politician and judge could hear the absolute truth. You defaulted on the massive commercial mortgage you secretly took out on this house to cover your failing investments. You thought you could hide it from your country club friends, but you could not hide it from the market. And I bought the debt. Pack your bags. The sleek glass doors of my executive boardroom at Apex Holdings suddenly flew open. My assistant tried to step in front of the crowd, but it was completely useless. An entire army of my extended family came marching into the room. Aunt Beatrice led the charge, gripping her silver-handled cane with white knuckles. Uncle Robert was right behind her, his face flushed with righteous anger. A dozen cousins and relatives flooded the space surrounding my long, polished conference table. They had clearly coordinated this ambush perfectly. They wanted to trap me in my own corporate sanctuary and break me down using the oldest weapon in our family arsenal: traditional family guilt. Beatrice slammed the tip of her cane against the floor, demanding my immediate attention. She looked at me with absolute disgust. "Maya, what you are doing to your parents is an absolute abomination," she declared, her voice trembling with theatrical outrage. "We just heard about the foreclosure. We heard that you actually bought the debt on their estate and sent armed men to throw them out into the street. You are tearing this family apart. You are a spiteful, ungrateful child who has completely lost her mind, and you need to stop this madness right now." Uncle Robert stepped up, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. "You have crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Maya," he barked. "You must respect your elders. Your father built the Vance family name from the ground up. He created a legacy that protects all of us, and you are trying to burn it down just because you felt a little left out as a child. Blood is blood, Maya. You do not betray your own flesh and blood over some petty financial disagreement. You are bringing shame to our entire generation and destroying the family legacy." The cousins nodded along, murmuring their agreement. They formed a solid wall of judgment around me. They expected me to shrink back in my leather chair. They expected me to bow my head and apologize the way I had always done when I was younger. They expected me to cave under the heavy, crushing weight of family expectations. Black women in our family were always taught to endure the pain in silence, to keep the peace, to protect the men and the elders at all costs. They thought they could use our shared history to bully me into submission and force me to hand back the power I had taken. But I was no longer that silent little girl. I sat perfectly still, resting my hands on the cool glass of the table. I let them rant and rave for a full 10 minutes. I let them exhaust their vocabulary of shame and disappointment. I watched their faces contort with fake moral superiority. When the room finally fell quiet, waiting for my immediate surrender, I slowly stood up. I smoothed out the front of my tailored suit and picked up a small silver remote from my desk. "You all care so deeply about the Vance family legacy," I said, my voice dead calm and echoing slightly in the large room. "You care about the generational wealth and the sacrifices our ancestors made to put us in these positions of power. You think I am the one destroying that legacy because I foreclosed on a house that Marcus could no longer afford." Beatrice scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "You are evicting your own parents, Maya," she snapped. "That is the literal definition of destroying a family." I did not argue with her. I simply pointed the silver remote at the massive glass wall running along the left side of the boardroom. I pressed a single button. The smart glass instantly turned opaque, blocking out the view of the Atlanta skyline. A high-definition projector hummed to life overhead, casting a brilliant beam of light across the frosted glass. A massive, incredibly detailed financial spreadsheet illuminated the room. The rows and columns were filled with red and green numbers, bank routing codes, and familiar names. The extended family stared at the wall in total confusion. Uncle Robert squinted at the screen, his aggressive posture faltering slightly as he tried to read the data. "What is this nonsense, Maya?" he demanded. "We did not come here for a corporate presentation on your little business ventures." I stepped around the table, walking directly toward the glowing spreadsheet. "I suggest you look very closely at these numbers, Uncle Robert," I instructed, my tone dropping to a cold, clinical whisper. "Because this is not my corporate presentation. This is the private ledger from Marcus Vance's personal banking server. I retrieved it during the hostile takeover of his financial institution yesterday morning." The room grew incredibly still. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector above our heads. "You all trusted my father to manage the family trust." I continued, tracing my finger along a highlighted row of data. "You trusted him to invest your retirement funds, your estate portfolios, and the college savings accounts for every single cousin standing in this room. You thought he was a financial genius growing the Vance legacy to protect all of you. But Marcus has not made a profitable investment in over a decade. He lost everything in the commercial real estate crash." I tapped the screen, bringing up a specific series of wire transfers. "Aunt Beatrice," I said, turning to look at the older woman. "Do you recognize this account number? It is the generational trust your grandfather left for you. Look at the withdrawal dated 3 months ago. $200,000 was wired directly to an offshore account. It did not go to a mutual fund. It went to pay for Naomi private chartered flights and her failing beauty brand supply chain." Beatrice let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest as her eyes darted across the screen. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "Marcus would never touch that money. It was locked in a high-yield bond." I scrolled down the spreadsheet, highlighting an entire block of red numbers. "Uncle Robert," I said, shifting my gaze to him, "your entire retirement portfolio was liquidated last year. $3 million completely wiped out. The funds were funneled through a shell company to cover the massive margin calls on Connor catastrophic stock trades. Connor used your life savings to gamble on the market, and he lost every single penny." The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. The relatives who had marched in here ready to crucify me were now staring at the wall in absolute horror. The arrogant cousins who had stood so proudly behind their parents suddenly realized their college funds and future inheritances were completely gone. The money was not tied up in the market. It was not waiting in secure accounts. It had been systematically drained to buy designer clothes, luxury vacations, and fake social media content for Naomi and Connor. "My parents did not default on their mortgage because of a simple market downturn," I explained, watching the devastation wash over my family. "They defaulted because they ran out of your money to steal. They have been secretly bleeding this entire family dry for years, just to maintain the illusion of their own superior wealth. They used your loyalty and your respect for the elders as a shield to rob you blind." Uncle Robert looked physically ill, his hands shaking as he stared at the zero balance next to his name. He turned to me, his face pale and drained of all its previous anger. "Is this real, Maya?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell me, this is not real." I shut off the projector, plunging the room back into natural light. I walked back to the head of the table and looked at the broken group of people standing before me. "It is entirely real," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "I did not ruin this family. I am the only one who actually survived it. Let us talk about legacy." For a fraction of a second, the boardroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the city traffic 20 stories below. Then the silence shattered like cheap glass. Uncle Robert let out a roar that did not sound human. He lunged across the polished conference table, completely ignoring the expensive floral arrangements, and grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his tailored suit. "Where is my money?" Robert screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You told me those accounts were locked in secure treasury bonds, you lying thief. Where is my retirement?" Marcus stumbled backward, knocking his heavy leather chair to the floor. He raised his hands in a desperate attempt to defend himself, but the illusion of his absolute authority was completely dead. "It is a mistake," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking, as he tried to pry his brother's thick hands off his throat. "Maya is manipulating the data. She hacked the banking servers to make us look bad. Do not listen to her, Robert." Aunt Beatrice did not care about his pathetic excuses. She slammed her heavy silver cane directly onto Marcus' custom Italian leather shoes. He howled in pain, dropping to one knee in the center of the room. "You stole from your own mother's trust fund!" Beatrice shrieked, her carefully styled hair falling wildly around her face. "You drained the generational accounts to buy private jets and luxury mansions for your spoiled, useless children. Give it back to me. I will see you rot in a federal prison, Marcus." Vivian tried to intervene, stepping between her husband and the furious mob of relatives. She held up her hands, flashing the massive diamond rings she had bought with their stolen money. "Please, everyone, calm down," Vivian pleaded, using her best soothing country club voice. "We are a family. We can sort this out quietly without making a public scene. We just had a temporary liquidity issue in the market. We will pay everyone back with interest, I promise you." A younger cousin named Sarah, who had just learned her medical school tuition was entirely gone, stepped right up to Vivian. "You paid for Naomi to have a destination wedding in Italy using my tuition money," Sarah yelled, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. "You do not have liquidity issues, Vivian. You are a parasite." Sarah grabbed the sleeve of Vivian's emerald green blazer and yanked it hard, tearing the expensive silk seam right off the shoulder. The boardroom dissolved into an absolute war zone. The pristine, elegant Vance family, the same people who had spent their entire lives judging my clothes, my career, and my worth, were now physically fighting each other over the scraps of a stolen fortune. Uncles were shoving cousins against the smart glass walls. Aunts were screaming vicious insults that would have gotten them banned from their precious social clubs. The sophisticated masks were completely gone, replaced by the ugly, greedy reality that had always been the true foundation of our family tree. I stood safely behind my line of private security contractors, watching the empire devour itself. I did not feel a single drop of pity or remorse. For 34 years, I had been the designated scapegoat. I had been the one they pointed their fingers at whenever they needed to feel superior. They called me ungrateful. They called me a failure. They told me I did not understand the value of family loyalty and traditional respect. But looking at them now, tearing each other apart like wild animals in my corporate boardroom, I knew I was the only one who actually understood the truth. Family loyalty was just a weapon they used to keep victims silent and compliant. Through the sea of swinging arms and screaming relatives, I noticed a shadow moving along the back wall. Connor, the golden boy, the arrogant heir who had taken millions of their dollars and gambled it away on reckless stock options to play Wall Street genius. He was watching his uncles threaten to murder his father, and he made the exact choice a coward knows how to make. He decided to run. Naomi was standing frozen near the coffee station, hyperventilating as Aunt Beatrice waved her cane in her general direction. Naomi reached out her trembling hand toward her husband, desperately needing him to protect her from the mob. Connor did not even look at her. He ducked his head, avoided his crying wife, and crept silently toward the heavy, frosted glass door at the rear of the boardroom. He actually thought he could just slip away into the hallway, ride the private elevator down to the parking garage, and disappear, leaving his parents and his wife to be torn apart by the family he helped destroy. He reached the heavy metal door handle and pulled it open, letting out a quiet breath of relief as he saw the empty hallway. But his cowardly escape lasted exactly 1 second. Two of my armed security guards stepped out from the shadows directly into the doorframe, their massive frames completely blocking the exit. They did not say a word to him. They just crossed their thick arms and stared down at his pale, trembling face. Connor stumbled backward into the boardroom, his eyes darting wildly around the room like a trapped animal. The fighting died down just enough for everyone to notice him trying to sneak out the back door. The angry mob of relatives slowly stopped yelling at Marcus and turned their collective attention to the architect of their financial ruin. They stared at Connor with absolute venom, realizing he was the one who had literally gambled away their futures. I stepped through the parting crowd, walking slowly until I was standing right in front of him. I looked at his ruined suit and his terrified eyes. "Going somewhere, Connor?" I asked, my voice echoing clearly across the sudden deadly silence of the room. "You really should not leave your own party so early, especially since the SEC investigators are waiting for you in the lobby." With Connor currently sitting in a sterile interrogation room facing federal investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission, Naomi was left entirely to her own devices. For a woman who had spent her entire adult life curating a fake digital existence, reality was a terrifying place to be. She had fled the airport and checked into a modest boutique hotel downtown, using a credit card she had hidden from the bankruptcy courts. She paced the small room, her mind racing, as she watched the news of her family empire collapsing trend across every major financial platform. She could not buy her way out of this, and she could not intimidate her way out of this. So she resorted to the only weapon she actually knew how to use. She decided to spin the narrative and play the ultimate victim. Naomi reached out to the editor of the Social Register, which was the largest celebrity and high society gossip blog on the internet. She promised them an exclusive, explosive interview about the sudden downfall of the Vance family. She set up her portable ring light in front of the hotel window, carefully applying her makeup to look perfectly distressed. She wanted to look exhausted, but beautiful, heartbroken, but resilient. When the video call connected with the journalist, Naomi delivered the performance of a lifetime. She cried on command, letting perfect tears roll down her cheeks, as she painted me as a deeply disturbed sociopath. She completely erased the truth about the stolen trust funds and the massive financial fraud her husband had committed. Instead, she spun a wild fictional tale of jealousy and obsession. She told the journalist that I had been ruthlessly plotting against her family for years, simply because I was a bitter, lonely woman. She stared directly into the camera and claimed that my entire financial takeover was nothing but a psychotic vendetta driven by my jealousy over her perfect life. She specifically highlighted her marriage to Connor, using her wealthy white husband as the ultimate symbol of her superiority. She claimed I could not stand the fact that she had secured a man of his status and pedigree and that I was destroying their legacy out of pure spite. She sobbed about how her innocent parents had been thrown out of their home by a monster who had manipulated the financial markets just to hurt them. 2 hours later, Marcus and Vivian arrived at the hotel room, having been formally evicted from their estate. They huddled around Naomi, sitting on the edge of the cheap hotel bed, waiting for the article to drop. When the story finally went live, the headline was massive and sensational, exactly as Naomi had planned. The article detailed my supposed campaign of terror, portraying the Vance family as tragic victims of a deranged corporate takeover. Naomi refreshed the page, watching the page views skyrocket into the millions within minutes. The comments section immediately flooded with support from her loyal followers and strangers who eagerly bought into the narrative of the poor, wealthy family being victimized. They called me a monster. They called for an investigation into my business practices. Marcus leaned back against the headboard, letting out a loud bark of triumphant laughter. He slapped his knee, declaring that public opinion would force me to back down. He actually believed that the pressure of a viral gossip article would make me surrender the assets and return his stolen mansion. Vivian smiled, pouring herself a glass of cheap hotel wine and raising it in a toast to her brilliant daughter. They were sitting in a tiny rented room, completely bankrupt, but for 10 glorious minutes they felt like untouchable royalty again. Then the website glitched. Naomi was mid-sentence reading a sympathetic comment out loud when the screen on her laptop suddenly froze. She frowned, clicking her mouse frantically, trying to scroll down the page. The entire website went entirely blank for a fraction of a second. Marcus sat forward, demanding to know if the hotel wireless internet had disconnected. But the connection was perfectly fine. The web page was automatically refreshing itself in real time. When the screen loaded again, the sensational headline painting Naomi as a victim was completely gone. The tearful video interview had been completely scrubbed from the top of the page. In its place was a massive bold headline that read, "The Real Vance Legacy, a Masterclass in Generational Fraud." Naomi dropped her mouse, her hands trembling violently as she stared at the screen. The new article did not have dramatic storytelling or fake tears. It was purely clinical and absolutely devastating. Embedded directly into the page were high-definition audio files and scanned PDF documents. Naomi clicked the first audio file with a shaking finger. The sound of her own voice filled the hotel room, clear and undeniable. It was a recording of her and Connor discussing exactly how they were going to route money from her aunt generational trust fund to pay for a massive shipment of inventory for her failing beauty brand. Marcus choked on his wine, coughing and sputtering as he stared at the screen. Below the audio file were dozens of high-resolution images of bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and foreclosure notices. The receipts showed every single dollar that had been stolen from the extended family, and exactly which luxury vacation designer handbag and sports car it had purchased. The article meticulously detailed how Marcus and Vivian had authorized the illegal transfers to maintain their public facade while their actual bank accounts bled dry. The comment section was updating in real time. The sympathy was instantly replaced by absolute revulsion. Her followers were turning on her by the second, disgusted by the undeniable proof that she had built her entire brand on stolen money. The perfect illusion was not just shattered, it was completely incinerated for the entire world to see. Naomi let out a horrifying scream, pushing the laptop away as if it had caught fire. She scrambled backward on the bed, clutching her hair as the reality of her permanent destruction set in. She was not just broke now, she was a public pariah. Her cell phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand, cutting through the panicked shouting of her parents. The screen flashed with my name. Naomi stared at it for a long second before reaching out with a trembling hand and answering the call. She pressed the phone to her ear, too terrified to speak. I sat at my desk in my corner office watching the exact same webpage analytics tick upward. My voice was calm, smooth, and completely devoid of mercy. "Did you honestly think you could control the media narrative against me, Naomi?" I asked softly, letting the words sink deep into her panic. "You really need to start reading the business section before you try to pull a public relations stunt. Did you forget who owns the parent company of that blog?" The grand ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel was draped in white silk and dripping with crystal. The Diamond Alumni Ball was the undisputed pinnacle of Atlanta high society. For 50 years, it was the one night where old money gathered to quietly consolidate their power. I stood in the VIP viewing gallery, hidden in the shadows of the second-floor balcony, watching the floor below. Despite being publicly exposed, evicted, and under active federal investigation, the Vance family had actually shown up. I had to admire their sheer pathological audacity. Marcus and Vivian were holding court near the ice sculpture. Connor was standing stiffly beside Naomi, his ankle monitor carefully hidden beneath the hem of his tailored tuxedo trousers. I had paid a small fortune in legal fees to ensure his bail was set impossibly high, but Marcus had somehow scraped together the last remnants of his offshore favors to get his golden son out of a holding cell. They were working the room with a manic, desperate energy. I watched Vivian corner a senior partner from a global investment firm. She was laughing too loudly, tapping his arm with a manicured hand, pretending her world was not currently on fire. I knew exactly what Marcus was saying to the circle of investors he had trapped near the bar. He was wiping sweat from his forehead and spinning the SEC investigation as a minor clerical error. He was calling the foreclosure a strategic tax maneuver. He even pulled out his phone, trying to show them fabricated projections of a new venture. They were begging for a bailout, hiding their absolute ruin behind forced smiles and borrowed designer gowns. Naomi was not faring as well. Every time she approached a group of socialites, the women would immediately stop talking and turn their backs. The gossip blog exposing her fraud had permanently ruined her social currency. I could see her mouthing the words artificial intelligence, trying to convince a former friend that the audio recordings of her plotting to steal family funds were deepfakes. The friend simply offered a pitying smile and walked away. Naomi stood near the champagne fountain, clutching her glass, looking like a terrified child who had just realized monsters were real. This gala had always been Vivian's absolute obsession. Growing up, I remember how she would spend months preparing for this single night. She would starve herself for weeks to fit into sample sizes and scream at the household staff if her jewelry was not polished to absolute perfection. During those weeks, I was always banished to my room. She would look at me with cold dismissal and tell me to stay hidden because I did not have the face, the grace, or the breeding for such an elite crowd. There was one specific piece of jewelry she had always coveted for this event. A $5 million flawless diamond cascade necklace from a private master jeweler in Geneva. 10 years ago, she had thrown a legendary tantrum in our foyer when Marcus told her he could not afford to buy it for the ball. He had blamed a bad quarter at the bank, but I now knew he had already started draining the family trusts to cover his catastrophic losses. She had sworn that one day she would wear that necklace down the Biltmore Grand Staircase and force every woman in the room to bow to her. I watched as a prominent venture capitalist politely extracted himself from Marcus' desperate grip and walked quickly away toward the coat check. The desperation was becoming entirely visible. The sharks in the room smelled blood in the water, and no one was going to throw the Vance family a lifeline. They were sinking fast, and they knew it. Suddenly, the soft classical music faded out, and the crystal chandeliers dimmed. A single bright spotlight hit the center of the stage. The master of ceremonies, a distinguished silver-haired man, stepped up to the microphone. A hush fell over the massive ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the opulent space. "Welcome to the 50th Annual Diamond Alumni Ball. As many of you know, this event faced unprecedented financial challenges this year due to sudden shifts in our local banking sector." He paused, and a few eyes darted toward Marcus, who stiffened his jaw and stared straight ahead, acting entirely unbothered. But tonight, magnificent celebration was completely preserved. The master of ceremonies continued, smiling brightly. "We were rescued by the incredible generosity of a secretive billionaire sponsor. This individual not only funded the entire gala, but made a historic endowment to our community foundation to ensure its survival for the next century. Tonight, she has chosen to step out of the shadows and reveal herself. Please direct your attention to the grand staircase and welcome our savior and honored host." The spotlight immediately swung away from the stage, cutting through the darkness and illuminating the top of the sweeping marble staircase. Marcus, Vivian, Naomi, and Connor all turned their heads along with the rest of the ballroom. I could see the greedy anticipation in my father's eyes, fully expecting to see an old money matriarch or a foreign oil tycoon he could manipulate into handing them a fresh start. I stepped out from the heavy velvet curtains and directly into the blinding beam of light. A collective gasp rippled through the sea of 500 guests. I was wearing a custom floor-length gown of deep midnight blue silk, tailored to absolute perfection. It draped over me like liquid armor, but the dress was not what made Vivian drop her champagne glass. The delicate crystal shattered against the marble floor, sending a sharp crash echoing through the silent room. Resting against my collarbone, catching the bright spotlight and scattering a million fractured rainbows across the walls, was the $5 million Geneva diamond cascade. It was the exact necklace Vivian had begged for, the ultimate symbol of status she had spent a decade dreaming about owning. I looked down from the top of the stairs, letting my gaze lock directly onto my mother's horrified face. She was trembling visibly, gripping Connor's arm for support, as the reality of her total defeat finally crushed the last breath from her lungs. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply began my slow, elegant descent down the marble steps, wearing the wealth they had tried to deny me and the power they could no longer steal. I reached the bottom of the grand marble staircase, and the sea of elite guests parted before me like a wave. No one whispered. No one even dared to take a breath.